The first thing my daughter said to a stranger at 30,000 feet was not hello. It was angel. A word so thin it almost didn't make the jump from her mouth to the air. It slipped out as a flight attendant lifted a plastic fork toward Harper's lips, and for a heartbeat I thought I'd imagined it. 13 months of silence will do that. Make you distrust miracles even when they're happening in your lap. We'd boarded the Tokyo-San Francisco red-eye with the choreography of the practiced grieving. Small bag, familiar bunny, aisle seat because I needed an exit strategy for feelings I couldn't name. Harper's tray table was a blank stage, untouched meal, sealed juice, napkin folded into a diamond as if geometry might coax appetite. When the attendant crouched to eye level, she didn't bring the script I'd learned to expect. Brisk pity, cheerful directives, questions that required more energy than my daughter could spend. She simply peeled back the foil, cut the pasta into smaller pieces, and held the fork like a possibility. She hasn't been eating much, I heard myself say, and hated how close my voice sat to apology. It's okay, the attendant murmured, attention steady as if the rest of the cabin had gone quiet just for us. We can try one small bite. If it's a no, it's a no. Harper blinked at the fork. The plane hummed. A baby 2 rows back protested sleep. A businessman laughed into his noise, canceling headphones like he'd been promised a funnier life. My daughter leaned forward by degrees and took the bite the way you test water with a toe. Chew, pause, swallow. The world didn't tilt or sing, but inside me something uncoiled that had forgotten it could. Angel, she whispered, and I flinched because I hadn't heard her voice in so long that even a single word felt like breaking news. The attendant's mouth tipped at one corner. Close, she said, still crouched. Just Alina. But I'll listen like an angel if you need one. Alina. It fit. Kindness without theater. She dabbed a dot of sauce from Harper's chin, then offered another bite without urgency. 2 became 3. 3 became enough for a small body to decide it was invited to stay in the day. I didn't say thank you because gratitude can feel like begging when you've been a father who keeps losing at solutions. Instead, I watched the rhythm she set, unhurried, grounding, and the way Harper allowed herself to be led by gentleness for the first time since the night everything ended with a phone call in a white room. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Bodies shifted, window shades rose. The Pacific unrolled itself outside like a patient map. Harper finished her juice and tucked her bunny beneath her cheek, the straw catching a shaft of cabin light like a small lighthouse. When the wheels met the runway and reverse thrust shook us into arrival, I didn't move. Neither did Harper. Alina passed once to check belts and once to collect the evidence of our small miracle. She didn't look at me with triumph the way specialists used to when a tactic landed. She looked at my daughter with respect, as if her appetite were an achievement separate from anyone's plan. We lingered until last. At the door, Alina stood with the other crew, posture straight, smile soft. Thank you for flying with us, she told a stream of strangers, and even though she had surely said it 1,000 times, it sounded like a truth she intended to keep. I should have kept walking toward customs and the waiting car, whose driver would call me sir with the exact distance I deserved. I didn't. Wait here, I told Harper, setting the carry-on beside the window where the runway twinkled like it had secrets it might actually tell. She nodded, solemn, our family's default. I went back. Alina, I said, and when she turned, her name felt like a test I hoped to pass. Up close, her eyes were unflinching without being hard. Yes. Thank you, I said, and the words, small as they were, felt like a greater admission that I could not buy what had just happened with all the money in my life. You're welcome, she said. Her gaze flicked past me to Harper, taking a quick measure the way people who care learn to do without getting caught caring. She did the hard part. She hasn't eaten like that since... I couldn't make my mouth finish the sentence. There are edges you can stand near only so long before they stop pretending to be safe. Since before. Alina waited. She was very good at leaving space without making you drown in it. I'm in Tokyo for 2 weeks, I said. I brought her because I thought a change of place might help. The word heal was a door I wasn't ready to open. Would you? I started, stopped, and stripped the pride off the ask. I'd like to pay you to spend time with her. Not as a nanny, familiarity, safety, just for a few days. You don't know me, she said, no offense in it, just arithmetic. I know what I saw, I said, a child trusting a stranger's fork more than the world. A stranger who didn't make trust into a ceremony. She followed my glance to the little girl at the window, with the bunny's ear twisted around her fingers like a tether. When Alina looked back at me, her face hadn't softened. It had clarified. 3 days, she said. 3 days, I repeated, like a man who understands that a runway is not a destination, but a gift. Tokyo met us with a rain that erased edges. The hotel suite was the kind of expensive that insists on being noticed. Marble, chrome, a couch that suspected we weren't stylish enough to sit. I ordered noodles from room service because a plate you don't have to talk to is sometimes all a person can manage. Harper climbed onto a stool with her backpack still on, like the straps could keep her tethered to the single good hour behind us. Alina washed her hands at the sink and joined us as if the room had invited her. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye at the door, she told Harper, crouching again to enter the child's horizon. Airports make time behave badly. Harper didn't answer. She reached out quickly, 2 seconds of contact, then retreat. The longest touch I'd seen her offer a stranger since the funeral. We ate. Alina narrated nothing complicated. This noodle is sneaky. This one looks like a tiny rope. Harper's mouth tilted at sneaky. Not a smile. A thought about smiling. She took another bite without negotiating terms. When it was time for teeth and pajamas and facing a bed that had no story attached to it yet, I took my place in the doorway, useless in learning. The book Alina pulled from her bag had a blue bird on the cover and not many words. He lost his flock in a storm, she read in a voice pitched for one small listener and one large father pretending to read emails. But the sky is too big to stay lost forever. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and failed to find the right shape for breathing. When Harper slept, Alina and I moved to the balcony, the city's neon writing ghost sentences on the glass. She accepted tea. I held coffee like a man holds an old habit when he knows he should set it down. We were quiet until the quiet began to feel like a conversation someone should answer. Why me? She asked at last, not coy, curious. Because you didn't try to fix her, I said. Or me? I thought of the laminated charts I'd collected like indulgences, the progress stickers, the pep talks by people who needed me to clap for their competence. You sat on the floor. My grandmother used to do that, Alina said, looking not at me but at the rain. Keep watch. She said some nights don't need solutions. They just need proof someone stayed. Proof someone stayed. The sentence rearranged the furniture in my chest. I'm not good with soft things, I admitted. I can buy a jet faster than I can tell my daughter the truth without breaking something. You can learn, she said. Not kind, not stern, simply factual, like saying rain is wet and lemons are stubborn. The second day started with pancakes made on a borrowed skillet. Alina let Harper choose between syrup and honey and didn't call it a test when the child changed her mind twice. We took the elevator down to the hotel's small garden, where koi shouldered the water like lanterns. That one's brave, Alina told Harper, pointing at the brightest fish. He keeps circling back for the others. Harper followed the fish with her eyes as if courage were a shape she could put in her pocket. Back upstairs, Harper drew a bird that looked mostly like a V until it didn't. She added a sun that was too big and perfect. She pressed the crayon hard enough to leave the table a memory. Where does he go? Alina asked. Home, Harper mouthed. The word didn't make sound. It didn't need to. We both heard it. Late afternoon led us to the photograph I pretended not to know was beneath Harper's pillow. Claire in a hospital bed, hair damp and magnificent, smile too big for her face. Newborn Harper blinking, fist near her mouth like a secret. Me, shockingly young, bent into the frame as if I could will myself useful. Claire, I said, and the name didn't crack the room the way it used to. Harper nodded like I'd returned a lighthouse to its spot on the coast. That night, when we turned off the lamp and the room offered us more quiet than we needed, I told Alina in the lounge, 3 days, and she set it back without barbs, like we had both agreed to the same experiment. I didn't know yet that she would run on the fourth morning, leaving a note under an overturned mug that said something about courage and ground. I didn't know that Harper and I would cross an airport like a country to find her, before a gate number made a decision she would pretend belonged to the universe. I didn't know that a drawing with two large letters would someday stick to my refrigerator and hold the house together. All I knew was this. The first word my daughter chose for a stranger had rearranged the sky, and I was going to spend whatever it took to learn the grammar of staying. The rain in Tokyo had a way of softening the world, of erasing edges until even grief looked almost manageable. Elliot watched it stripe the window that morning, listening to Harper's quiet breathing as she slept curled around her bunny. He could tell, even before the first alarm, that she had dreamt something gentle. Her face wasn't tight with the usual invisible strain that marked her nights. Alina was already awake. He found her in the small kitchenette, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, whisking batter as if breakfast were a kind of meditation. The scent of vanilla and steam from the kettle wrapped around the air. "Morning," she said without looking up. "You take your coffee black, right?" Elliot blinked. "How did you—" "Your daughter told me yesterday." Well, pointed at your cup, shook her head at the sugar. He almost smiled. "She notices everything." "Kids do, especially the things we think we've hidden." She poured the batter into a small pan. The sound of it, sizzle, settle, filled the silence between them. He realized he hadn't shared a quiet like this in years. Not the sterile quiet of empty rooms, not the anxious quiet of loss, but something alive. When Harper emerged in her pajamas, hair wild, rubbing her eyes, Alina crouched down to meet her. "I made you pancakes. Want to help me flip the next one?" Harper hesitated, glancing at Elliot for approval. He nodded and she patted over barefoot, gripping the spatula with both hands. Alina guided her through the motion, slow and deliberate. The pancake turned perfectly. "Teamwork," Alina said, and Harper's lips curled into something that could, if you looked closely, be called a smile. After breakfast, they walked through the narrow streets near the hotel, where paper lanterns swayed under dripping eaves. Tokyo was still half asleep, shops just opening, the scent of miso and rain mixing in the air. Harper held Alina's hand as naturally as if she'd been doing it for years. Elliot trailed behind, unsure if the ache he felt in his chest was jealousy or gratitude. They stopped at a garden tucked behind a temple. The koi pond mirrored the sky's pale gray. "They look like living coins," Alina whispered. Harper crouched at the edge, watching the fish nudge each other. "That one's gold," Harper said, the words small but clear. Elliot froze. She'd spoken again. Just like that, without fanfare. Alina didn't turn or react too sharply. She only nodded. "He is. Maybe he's lucky." Harper looked up at her father. "Can we get one?" Elliot swallowed. "A goldfish?" She nodded solemnly. "We'll see," he said. "Maybe when we get home." "Okay." She turned back to the pond, satisfied, as if the word home didn't yet carry the weight it did for him. That afternoon they visited a small bookstore Alina knew, hidden between two cafes. The owner greeted her in Japanese, calling her Tao-san with fond familiarity. "You come here every flight," he said, smiling. "Always reading the sad ones." "I like books that fix things," she replied, "even when they don't end that way." Harper wandered toward the children's section, where the covers were a riot of color and animals mid-adventure. "Can she pick one?" Elliot asked. "Of course." Harper came back clutching a story about a bird who lost its song but found it again by listening to the wind. Alina read the title aloud and raised her eyebrows at Elliot. "Seems on brand." He exhaled through a quiet laugh. "She has a type." At checkout, Alina paid before he could intervene. "My treat," she said when he protested. "She found her voice today. That deserves a celebration." Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it. He was used to giving. Money, things, decisions. Gratitude still felt like a foreign language. That evening, Harper sat cross-legged on the rug, coloring the bird from the book. Elliot and Alina watched from the couch, the kind of tired that comes from being alive in the right way. "Do you ever miss flying?" he asked. "Sometimes," Alina said, "but I don't miss the leaving." He looked at her profile, the calm, the quiet resolve. "Why'd you start?" She shrugged. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about clouds. She said they were angels on lunch break. I wanted to see if she was right." "Was she?" "Some days. He nodded slowly. Harper called you an angel. Elena smiled faintly. She just needed a word for safe. Safe, he repeated, as if testing the fit. That's not something I've been able to give her for a while. You're giving it now, she said, even when you don't see it. The rain had returned, tapping lightly against the glass. Harper held up her drawing for inspection. Bird's done. Elena crouched beside her. He looks brave. He was lost, Harper said. But he kept flying? Harper nodded. He found home. Elliot's throat tightened. He turned to the window, pretending to study the skyline. But he felt Elena's gaze, steady, unjudging. She saw right through the walls he'd built, and instead of dismantling them, she simply waited for him to open a door. The next morning, Elliot woke to find a note taped to the fridge in Elena's neat handwriting. Out for a walk with Harper. Back by 8. She wanted pancakes again. It startled him, that ordinary domesticity. The room looked lived in, mug beside the sink, coloring pencils still scattered. He realized this was what the house in San Francisco had been missing. Not furniture, not art. Life. When they returned, Harper was clutching a small umbrella Elena had bought her. It has cats, she announced proudly. Of course it does, Elliot said. Elena handed him a coffee. She convinced a street vendor to give us a discount. You negotiated? Elliot asked Harper. Mock serious. Harper nodded gravely. He smiled. She charmed him, Elena corrected. I just translated. For a while, the three of them moved through the day, as if time had loosened its grip. They ate noodles in a shop with paper walls and laughter leaking through from the kitchen. Harper fed Elena a noodle and burst into giggles when it slipped. Elliot laughed too, really laughed, and it startled him. It was the first time the sound hadn't felt like an echo of his old life. That night, Harper fell asleep on the couch mid-story. Elena lifted the blanket over her and sat back down beside him. You're good with her, he said quietly. She makes it easy, Elena replied. Kids forgive faster than adults. He hesitated. Did you always want children? Her expression shifted, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. I used to think I'd be terrible at it. Too much moving around, too many goodbyes, but sometimes... She trailed off, watching Harper's breathing. Sometimes I wonder if I could learn. Elliot followed her gaze. You already are. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. He wanted to ask her to stay longer than 3 days. He wanted to ask what her favorite book was, what she did when she wasn't flying, if she dreamed in airports. But he said none of it. Because people who save you once don't owe you a second rescue. Still, as the lights dimmed and Harper stirred, whispering something incoherent in her sleep, Elliot caught Elena watching her, not with pity, but with something gentler. Something that made the word home feel less like geography and more like a decision waiting to be made. They woke into a thin, forgiving light, the kind that makes rooms look gentler than they are. Harper padded to the kitchenette without a word and set her bunny on the counter, ears askew like an antenna searching for signal. Elena slid a plate across the island. Decision of the day, she said, arranging 2 small bowls. Syrup or honey? Harper's gaze hopped between them. Both, she whispered, as if asking too much. Elena nodded, as if abundance were simple. Elliot poured coffee and didn't immediately reach for his phone. Something about the morning felt like a room you enter without knocking. Soft, inhabited, undeserved. Harper ate in measured corners, watching Elena the way flowers track sun. When the plate was cleared to polite proof, she climbed onto the chair with her knees and drew a little house on the hotel notepad. A door, a square of window, a crooked triangle roof. She added 3 stick figures beneath a sun that took up too much sky. Tell me, Elena said, leaning at Harper's level. This one is me, Harper said, tapping the middle stick. This is Daddy. She paused, pencil hovering. This is... you. The word landed, shy and factual. Elliot felt it like a small, accurate bell rung inside his ribs. They took the morning to the garden because it had become their overseas ritual. Koi nosing the water like punctuation, maple leaves holding the last of the rain. Harper counted fish and skipped 9 again. Superstitions, sometimes choosing children before children choose them. Lantern, she told the brightest Koi, pointing. He shows the way. Always, Elena said, as if making the myth official. They sat on the bench that had learned their shape. Elliot watched his daughter trace the grain with a fingertip and tried to remember when he last let a day be slow on purpose. The answer hurt. "I keep thinking there's a version of this where I paid for the right expert sooner," he said, looking at the pond so the confession had somewhere to go. "Where I didn't outsource presence and call it care." Alina didn't correct him. She dropped a leaf onto the water and watched it sail a quiet circle. "I kept thinking there was a version of my life where staying didn't scare me," she said, "where I didn't leave first to avoid being left." He turned. She didn't look away. "When I was 9, she continued, my mother brought home men who forgot houses are supposed to be safe. I learned the geography of closets, the laundry one especially. You can hear the whole apartment from in there. You can measure nights by footsteps and know when the danger is posture and when it's breath." She gave the smallest shrug, not to minimize, only to set the memory down. "My grandmother found me asleep on a pile of towels and took me home the next day. She said, 'We will be boring now,' like it was a sacrament. She cut my hair, made soup that smelled like Sundays, and left the hall light on even at noon. Doors slam quieter if the light's already on." "Boring," Elliot repeated, letting the word work its way into his mouth. "I want that. I've been sprinting in place since the hospital. I mistook speed for survival." "Speed is just louder," Alina said. "Grief hates loud." Harper held a leaf up to the sun, eyes narrowed, as if she could read veins like a secret map. "Grandma," she said, sounding the word out carefully, and Alina smiled with a gentleness that felt earned. "She kept watch," Alina told Harper. "That's a job, too." Back upstairs, the elevator hummed them into noon. Harper spread crayons on the carpet like a ceremony. Alina brewed tea and set a cup where Elliot's laptop might have been. No one mentioned the laptop. Presence, he was learning, doesn't like to share a table. He sat on the floor beside Harper. "What should we draw?" he asked. "A song," she said. "How do you draw a song?" He felt foolish and delighted by the question. "Like wind," Harper decided, and began to drag blue across the page in long ribbons. A bird formed inside it. First a V, then a body, then a determined eye. Elliot added a lopsided branch. Alina, without comment, drew a small sun too big for scale and somehow perfect. The room shifted at the edges. Some afternoons do this. Invite the past to sit down without letting it eat first. Harper put her crayon down and went to her backpack. She returned with a folded photograph, corners pale from being held. She set it on the floor with both hands flat, as if introducing a guest. Claire, smiling tired and incandescent. An infant like a bright argument against despair. A younger Elliot bent into frame. He had avoided the picture for a year the way you avoid mirrors in unfamiliar bathrooms. "Mommy," Harper said, not accusation, geography. "Claire," Elliot answered, because avoiding the name had been ice, and he was done tiptoeing. The syllable landed in the room and didn't crack anything that hadn't already broken. "She loved pink peonies," he added, the memory arriving intact and a little stunned to be alive. "Called them loud flowers?" "Loud," Harper echoed, pleased by the rightness. Alina touched the rim of the photograph without touching the faces. "Tell me about her," she said to Harper, not as a test but as an invitation. "She sang in the car," Harper said. "Soft when the light was red, loud when the light was green." Elliot laughed, an unpracticed chord. "That's true. What did she sing?" Alina asked. Harper frowned in concentration. "I forgot. Would you know it if you heard it?" Alina's voice was careful, the way you step into cold water, slowly to keep from shocking the heart. Harper tilted her head. "Maybe." Alina hummed a line, then another. Not a performance, a search. "You are my sunshine," she tried, so quiet it barely reached the window. Harper's eyes lifted, widened. She nodded once, decisive. Alina sang again, still small, Harper's mouth shaping the words without sound. Elliot joining on the third line because some melons ripen in your throat when you don't expect them. They didn't cry the way movies ask you to. Tears came the way weather does. A softness at the edges, a slight brightening. Air changed. Alina finished, and the room exhaled like it had been holding its breath since the ER. Harper reached for the photograph and looked at it for a long beat, as if calibrating. She walks behind us, she announced and drew a faint gray triangle figure just behind the three she'd sketched that morning. So we don't fall. Elliot could have argued with the metaphysics. He could have talked about therapy. He could have corrected a child's cosmology with adult grammar. He didn't. That makes sense, he said, because it did, somehow truer than any kinder euphemism he'd offered in the past 2 years. Thank you for telling me. Harper returned to her drawing and, with ceremonial seriousness, added a halo to the fourth triangle in a gold crayon she'd been saving. Not angel, she clarified, glancing at Alina like an apology and a thanks. Just light. Just light, Alina agreed. After nap, a real one, heavy and dreamless, the kind tired children fall into when a room has declared itself harmless, they sat on the bed and practiced the dull magic of being a family, socks sorted, hair braided in 3 patient passes, a game invented with 2 spoons and a lemon that had no rules except not to drop it. Elliot tried braiding and made a mess. Alina laughed with him, not at him, and Harper let him try again. It felt like a small sacrament. Near dusk, the rain paused like a sentence with options. Alina took them to the bookstore where the owner knew her name and her taste. He bowed to Harper and produced a thin volume from behind the counter. For a brave bird, he said in English, and Harper bowed back in the solemn, delighted way children accept rituals as if they were invented for them. Elliot tried to pay. Alina intercepted with a look he obeyed before he recognized it as a boundary. Back at the hotel, the world folded itself into warm noodles and a bath that smelled vaguely of oranges. Elliot read the bird book aloud because when he heard his voice in that cadence, he recognized a person he wanted to keep being. Alina listened on the carpet, spine against the bed, eyes closed as if cataloging the sound for a flight she hadn't decided to take. When Harper slept, Alina went to the balcony. Elliot followed because his body had learned that was where truth waited. Neon stitched the city into a quilt nobody owned. Thank you, he said, the kind of gratitude that doesn't ask to be deflected. For what? Alina asked without looking away from the skyline. For not fixing us and calling it love, he said, for keeping watch. She let a breath out, a slow ribbon. My grandmother used to sit in the hall when I couldn't sleep, she said, back against the wall, old cracked radio on, soup warming the air, saying, I'll be right here until morning. I thought that's what angels were. People who made boring promises and kept them. Boring promises, he repeated, and smiled because it felt like relief disguised as homework. I can keep those. You can learn to, she said, and it didn't sound like a doubt. He leaned on the railing, the city's damp pressing against his shirt. Claire died on a Tuesday, he told her, because secrets only grow heavier in silence. I sent an email about Q4 projections on Wednesday and called that coping. Harper asked when Mommy would be done being late. I told her soon. His mouth bent around the old shame. I am still telling her soon. Then stop, Alina said softly. Not cruel, real. Tell her true. Show her proof. That's how the ghosts learn the house's new rules. He nodded, the motion small and final. Okay. They stood there long enough for the street below to change owners. Somewhere a scooter shouted, somewhere a door latched softly, somewhere, everywhere, people did the dull, faithful work of living. Elliot felt the first honest tug of wanting the same and didn't apologize for it. Inside, the photograph lay on the nightstand, newly ordinary. On the table, a drawing of 4 triangles and a gold halo waited for a fridge it would someday claim. In the quiet, a lullaby's last note hung like a lantern over a pond. Morning would bring errands and a threshold, the 4th day, where fear would make an old argument. But tonight the ghosts were fed and named, and a child slept with her hand open, palm up, as if ready to receive a life that would arrive in small pieces and ask to be assembled with patience. The morning she left was bright, unforgivably bright, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper than you want to see. Elliot didn't notice at first. He woke to the smell of lemon tea and the sound of quiet that wasn't ordinary. Harper's bunny sat on the counter, its ear tucked under a mug that wasn't steaming. The note was beneath it, folded once, written in Alina's square, careful hand. You both deserve to keep flying, even when I'm not in the sky. 3 days were more than I meant to give, and more than I thought I could. Be kind to the mornings. A. Elliot stared at it long enough for the letters to blur, his mind trying to rearrange them into something reversible. Harper shuffled into the room in her pajamas, hair pointing in every direction, like she'd slept inside a thunderstorm. "Where's Miss Alina?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. He opened his mouth, found no words, and closed it again. Harper watched him, small and still, and something in her face told him she already knew the shape of absence. "She had to go fly," he managed finally. "She'll come back." The lie tasted like metal. Harper sat at the table, silent, tracing circles on the placemat with one finger. After a long moment, she said, "Angels don't need planes." Then she slid off the chair and went to her room, Bunny trailing like a flag at half-mast. Elliot stood alone in the kitchen, the note still open, the words "be kind to the mornings" echoing like a dare. He wasn't kind to it. He spent the day pacing through rooms too clean to feel real, answering emails he couldn't read, watching the door as if grief might knock politely before entering again. By evening, Harper hadn't eaten. Her crayons were lined up in a neat, color-coded row, untouched. He tried stories, pancakes, even her favorite cartoon. Nothing worked. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper he barely caught. "People always leave." The words landed like a verdict. Elliot knelt beside her, hands useless in the air. "Not everyone," he said, but Harper didn't look up. "Mommy left," she said. "Now Miss Alina." He wanted to say death wasn't the same as leaving, that jobs weren't the same as dying, that love had rules, but all the explanations in the world couldn't reach a 5-year-old who'd already learned what absence feels like in her bones. So he did the only honest thing left. He pulled her close, held on until her small body softened against him, and whispered, "I'm still here." The next morning, he called Narita Airport. "Alina Taus," he told the operator. "Flight attendant, probably on a Pacific route. I need to know where she's headed." "Sir, we can't." He hung up before she finished. By the second day, he'd memorized every flight number leaving Tokyo, with a chance of holding her. He scanned departure boards like they were maps to something divine. Harper followed him through the terminal with her backpack and her bunny, both too large for her small frame. "Are we flying?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, which was both too much and too little truth. At the gate, he asked again at the counter, voice steady only because years of business had trained it that way. "Crew list for Flight 742 to San Francisco?" The agent smiled politely. "That's restricted information, sir." He exhaled sharply. "Please, He stopped. The desperation in his own voice startled him. The woman softened, not enough to break the rules, but enough to lower her tone. "You'll see her again," she said gently. "The world's round." He wanted to believe her. He didn't. He sat in the waiting area, Harper beside him coloring in the margins of an old boarding pass. "Miss Alina said to be kind to mornings," Harper murmured. "She did," Elliot said. "Maybe we should find her and tell her we tried." It was the kind of logic only a child could turn into gospel. He smiled faintly. "Maybe we should." They didn't find her that morning, but they found something else, a rhythm, a movement that felt almost like faith. Every day they returned to the airport with a packed lunch, watching planes lift into the sky. Harper naming each one like they were birds she'd trained herself. "That's Lantern," she said, pointing at a silver jet. "He's brave." Elliot nodded. "He keeps circling back." By the third day, even the security staff recognized them. The woman at the information desk brought Harper a paper crane and said it was lucky. "You have to make a wish," she told her. Harper closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked certain. "I wished she'd come back." That night, Elliot dreamed of Claire. She was sitting in the old kitchen, sunlight on her hair, humming "You're My Sunshine." When he reached out, she said, "You're doing it right this time," and vanished before he could ask what it was. He woke up at dawn, a clarity like current in his chest. Harper was still asleep, one hand clutching her bunny, the other open, as if waiting to hold something invisible. He packed their things quietly and booked a return flight home. Narita's glass walls reflected everything twice, once as it was, once as it should have been. They were halfway through security when Harper tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she said softly, pointing. At the far end of the concourse, a flight crew moved in slow procession toward Gate 41. Navy uniforms, rolling cases, clipped goodbyes. And there, hair tied back, posture straight, eyes scanning like she'd felt the pull, was Alina. Elliot froze. Harper didn't. She dropped her bunny, sprinted across the floor, and before any adult could stop her, she collided into Alina's knees, hugging her like a small anchor. "You left," Harper said, voice trembling. "We didn't say goodbye." The crew turned, startled. Alina knelt, eyes wide, mouth caught somewhere between laughter and disbelief. "Harper," she breathed. "Sweetheart, Elliot reached them seconds later, heart hammering. "I'm sorry," he said, breathless. "We shouldn't have." But Alina shook her head. "You found me," she said. Her voice wavered, a fragile thread between shock and something deeper. "You really came," Harper nodded solemnly. "We were kind to the mornings." The words broke something open. Alina pressed a hand over her mouth, tears forming where her discipline had always lived. "You remembered." Elliot's voice was low. "I wasn't going to let her think people always leave." The airport around them blurred into motion. Announcements, luggage wheels, the hum of departures. For a moment it felt like the whole place had bent around their reunion, as if even time had stopped to watch. "I was scared," Alina admitted quietly, "of staying, of wanting too much." "Then don't stay," Elliot said. "Just come with us." She blinked. "Come with you?" "Back to San Francisco," he said. "Just until you figure out what's next. Harper needs you." He hesitated, then added, "So do I." Harper looked up, eyes pleading. "Please?" Alina's hands trembled slightly. Behind her, the gate agent called final boarding. She looked toward the plane, her world of departures, and then back at the father and daughter standing before her, both holding out something she'd spent her whole life afraid to accept. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Okay." The agent called again, but Alina didn't move. She turned, handed her boarding pass back to a colleague, and walked toward Elliot and Harper. "Let's go home," she said. And as they left the terminal, Harper slipped her small hand into Alina's and whispered, "See? Angels don't need planes." For the first time in years, Elliot laughed without it hurting. San Francisco rose from the bay like a city trying to remember its own reflection. Bridges blinking, water turned to dark silk, neighborhoods stitched in cautious light. Harper pressed her palm to the jet window as if she could hold one block in place until it promised not to move. She fell asleep before the wheels kissed the runway. Alina didn't sleep. She watched the runway lamps drift past and felt the old ache of departure come and go like turbulence. Felt, acknowledged, not obeyed. The house on the hill waited like a thesis, glass and stone, ceilings tall enough to make whispers sound like performance. Walls tastefully blank in a way only money can curate. The alarm chirped something friendly. The silence behind it did not. Elliot carried Harper over the threshold, her bunny tucked beneath her chin like a passport. Alina followed with a carry-on and a suspicion that homes don't know how to recognize guests until you spill something. "Is this home?" Harper asked, voice small but steady. "It can be," Elliot said. He said it to Harper, then to Alina, then to the rooms themselves. They didn't try to conquer it that night. Takeout boxes appeared like a translation of loneliness into carbohydrates. Alina found a small lamp and set it on the kitchen island, clicked it on, an amber circle insisting on softness in a room that preferred shine. Harper ate 3 noodles and arranged her crayons in a neat constellation, as if mapping a sky she trusted. Morning made the house honest. Daylight came in blunt, naming dust in corners and the peculiar quiet of a kitchen that has rarely consented to burn. Elliot made pancakes, if you could call them that. The first folded wrong, the second carbonized. Harper ate both solemnly, as if accepting an offering from a new god. Alina accepted a third and said, "I like them a little burnt," which was not true but felt truer than asking him to be better before the house had learned their names. Then she built a corner. She dragged an armchair from a room with books that looked unread, placed it by the window where a sliver of bay turned noon into a rumor, and spread a throw blanket like a small country declaring independence. Into a basket went the bird book, the notebook with triangle families, a new volume about a fox who navigated by scent. Crayons stood in a jar. A plant, stubborn, heart-shaped leaves, assumed its post. On the fridge at Harper's eye level, she stuck a sticky note that simply read, "Pancakes. Walk, story, quiet, no times." Time would have to earn its place. "Whose corner is that?" Harper asked. "Yours," Alina said, "and mine when invited." Harper placed Bunny on the chair like a dignitary and nodded once. The afternoon introduced them to the backyard. Hedges clipped to a geometry textbook, a patch of grass suspiciously green, a view that performed wealth even when no one was watching. In the far bed, someone had planted a lemon sapling and forgotten it, or perhaps expected it to remember itself. Harper crouched beside it, tipped her head and said, "It smells like yellow." "Then we'll help it get loud," Alina said, and made a mental note to buy a watering can that wasn't handsome but worked. Routine arrived like a boat, slowly, then all at once. Morning pancakes, less burnt each day, a walk around the block where neighbors learned to greet without prying, a library card with Harper's 2 large letters, stories after lunch, the bird finding wind, the fox finding home by nose, a book about kitchens that never close. Alina discovered a community center with a music class at 10. The room smelled of mop and birthday cake and good intentions. Harper stood at the edge until the first beat landed, then lifted a triangle and found the down beat without apologizing for brightness. Elliot left for the office after breakfast on the second day, jacket over his shoulder like a man making an old habit promise new outcomes. 2 hours, he said, light, hopeful. It took him 2 hours and 8 minutes. He texted from the car with a contrition that made the words try too hard. Harper traced a circle on the sticky note and announced, "Later is bigger than now." Alina didn't argue. With the house to themselves, they taught it to notice. A pot of water simmered with a cinnamon stick because scent is the first language of belonging. Windows cracked, letting fog press its cool face to the sills. Harper arranged stones from the walk along the kitchen windowsill, heavy anchors for a day that wandered. Lunch happened on the floor because chairs felt like auditions. They ate strawberries from a bowl that had belonged to no one until now and declared it theirs. When Elliot returned, he paused in the doorway like a man stepping into a museum where everything is labeled someone else's life. Harper patted the blanket beside her without ceremony. He sat. He took a blue crayon and drew a river without asking if he was doing it right. Later, when Harper fell asleep with her palm open, Alina stood behind him in the hall and watched him watch his daughter, and neither said aloud that the house seemed to exhale for the first time. But habits are tenacious. On the 4th day, a calendar began to reassert itself with the slow arrogance of tide. Calls multiplied, each insisting on its emergency. A board member scheduled a quick sync at 6 connoisse that lingered like a guest who suspects dessert exists. Elliot tried to thread the needle. Home by dinner, laptop exiled to the counter, eyes honest. Harper noticed the glow anyway. "Later," she asked when he said, "1 minute." "Later," he said, and winced because he heard himself. After bedtime on the patio, Alina watched fog unroll itself over the water. "We can't be a vacation you visit between fires," she said, tone even. "I don't need speeches. I need patterns." He rubbed his thumb along the railing. "I'm trying," he said, and he was. Trying and choosing are cousins that look alike until the bill arrives. "I can do long days," she said. "I can do plans that change. I can't do ambiguity as a lifestyle. It teaches children to doubt their own clocks." He nodded, almost relieved to have the rule named. "Then I'll choose boring. I'll defend it." The next morning he was at the table at 7:10 with butter already melting and his phone face down, an act of faith and defiance. He burned only the edges. Harper ate 2 triangles and sang her triangle's tone under her breath. At 10 years she held the triangle at music class with professional gravity. At 12:30 she napped with the Fox book like a badge. At 2 to share reality phone. Elliot let it go to voicemail and then didn't. By 4 Sharon the day had begun to accelerate. At 5:58 a message pinged. Just 5 minutes. At 6:22 the front door opened into a kitchen neatly cleaned, a table set for 2, a drawing placed top center with forensic care. 3 triangles with touching corners beneath a too bright sun. Behind them, faint and steady, a 4th, gray haloed gold. Across the bottom in letters pressed too hard, "You are home." Alina sat in the corner chair, Harper asleep on her shoulder, both turned slightly toward the lemon sapling's outline through glass. She looked up as Elliot stepped in, apology already arranging itself. "She waited," Alina said softly. "Then she drew. Then she fell asleep because waiting takes muscle." He stood at the island and read the sentence twice to make sure it wasn't a trick of light. Shame came first, swift and hot. Something else followed, slower. Recognition, the way you recognize your face after a haircut you finally needed. He didn't make a speech. He walked to the sink, washed his hands, and started chopping the garlic that waited by a pan as if preordained. "They'll tell you this job requires nights," Alina said later, the three of them at the window eating noodles like a sacrament. "Tell them it requires mornings." He nodded. "I will." It felt less like promise and more like policy. In the days that followed, pattern tried to put its roots down. Elliot moved a meeting to 7 a.m., then 2. He told legal no on Thursdays after 6 without blood. He set an alarm that chirped at 6:15. Turn down the world. The first time it went off in a conference room, someone joked. The second time, no one did. He arrived home at 6:22 3 days in a row and learned how to say later to $1 billion and now to a triangle. Even so, the house knew when old weather approached. It came in the sound of Elliot's shoes when he forgot to remove urgency at the door, in Alina's fingertips brushing the guest room suitcase handle like a superstition, in Harper's pause before choosing where to eat. The plant in the corner drooped once and recovered. The sapling outside held its small green nubs like a conspiracy. One afternoon, Alina took Harper grocery shopping with a tiny cart designed to turn children into co-conspirators. Harper chose lemons and a ridiculous bouquet of daisies. At checkout, the cashier asked, "Special occasion?" And Harper said, "We're teaching the house," which made the woman blink and then give them the daisies for free. They stopped by a neighborhood bookstore on the way back. The clerk learned their names at a speed that suggested skill, not intrusion. "You're the Triangle family," she said, grinning when Harper signed the receipt with a careful H. "We have a new book about a kitchen that learns to laugh." Alina bought it and didn't let Elliot reimburse her. "Some things need to be gifts," she said. That evening, Elliot showed Harper how to crack eggs without letting shells sneak in. One did. He said, "Perfect," and meant it, because imperfection had become proof of occupation, not failure. After dinner, Harper declared the lemon tree needed a song. They stood on the patio and hummed something close to "You Are My Sunshine" until the neighbor's dog added percussion. The sapling stayed quiet, but in the morning one green bead looked more certain. And yet, the old life does not leave, it negotiates. At 7:03 one night, Elliot's phone lit with a name from an era when his days were measured in exits and entries, Charles Whitmore. He let it ring. "Tomorrow," he told Alina, and it felt like choosing a small country over an empire. He touched the drawing on the fridge as if confirming that paper can, in fact, bear weight. Later in the doorway of Harper's room, Alina watched him tuck the blanket, a move measured to the slow count she had taught him. "You're good at this," she whispered. "I'm learning to be boring," he said. She smiled, the kind that makes the air less formal. It's heroic when you do it on purpose. He turned in the hall and found her looking past him, toward the guest room, toward the suitcase that didn't get to vote anymore. "Does it feel like you live here?" he asked, because honesty had made better weather than scripts. "Some hours, yes," she said. "Some hours I'm a visitor who knows where the glasses are." "You have a key," he said. "I do," she answered, and didn't touch it and didn't bolt. The victory was quiet, almost invisible, exactly the right size. Night pressed its forehead to the windows. The matte syrup circle on the marble refused to yield to any cleaner and declared itself a landmark. The plant lifted after water. The alarm waited at 6:15. In a city where speed is currency, 3 people practiced a different economy, counting in pancakes and pages, and the number of times a door opened at the hour a child had learned to trust. Morning would test them again. It always did. But on the refrigerator, at the height of a small person who had learned airports too soon, a sentence kept its watch. "You are home." The house began at last to believe it. It started with the sound of a voicemail. Elliot had ignored the first two calls, thinking he could outwait his old life. But on the third ring, Harper was playing near the lemon tree, and Alina's eyes met his across the kitchen with the calm that says, "Face it, or it'll follow you in." He played the message on speaker. Charles Whitmore's voice filled the kitchen, measured, paternal, a man so certain of his authority, he didn't bother to raise it. "Elliot, we need to discuss what you're doing. You're missing investor calls and the board's getting nervous. I've defended you long enough, but this new domestic experiment is costing us stability. Call me." The message ended with the soft beep of entitlement. Harper kept stacking blocks, unbothered. Alina's expression didn't move, but the air did. "You'll have to answer eventually," she said. "I know," Elliot said. His voice had that particular fatigue only people who've lived under someone else's shadow can recognize. "He doesn't mean harm. He just still thinks the company's the only child worth raising." Alina set down her coffee. "Then it's time to teach him you have another." That afternoon, Harper drew another note for the fridge, her new medium of protest. A stick figure with a briefcase stood outside a house, crying. Above it, in careful block letters, 622 or you cry again. Alina couldn't stop laughing when she saw it. Elliot didn't. "She's serious," he said. "That's the point," Alina replied. "She's learned from us. That's progress." He exhaled, a sound halfway between guilt and relief. "I don't want her to see me like I saw him." "Then don't," she said simply. Charles arrived 2 days later, unannounced, in the kind of black car that announces itself even when it's silent. The doorbell's chime carried an echo of the old world. Suits, boardrooms, air too cold for honesty. Harper answered first because she was fast and curious. "Grandpa," she said, testing the word. It still fit, barely. "Hello, little one," Charles said, crouching with surprising gentleness. "You've grown." Alina stepped in from the kitchen, eyes alert but calm. She greeted him politely, offering tea. Charles declined, his gaze already taking inventory of the house. The mess of crayons, the small art corner, the lemon tree visible through the glass. "Seems you've made some adjustments," he said. "We're learning boring," Alina said, tone soft but sure. "It's working." Charles didn't answer. His focus was on Elliot, who appeared a moment later, sleeves rolled, barefoot, hair still damp from a shower. "Dad," he said, even though Charles wasn't his father. The habit of hierarchy was hard to unlearn. "Elliot," Charles began, tone clipped. "I gave you time to process Claire's death. I gave you distance when you asked. But what I see now, this concerns me. You're letting the company drift while you play house with a flight attendant." Alina's spine went straight, but Elliot raised a hand before she could respond. "Stop," he said quietly. "She has a name." Charles's eyes hardened. "Elliot, you're better than this sentimentality." "No," Elliot said. "I'm finally worse, and I think that's the point." Charles looked genuinely confused. "You built your life on precision, on order, on doing what needed to be done. I taught you that." "You did," Elliot said. "You also taught me how to miss dinners and make it look noble." For the first time, the older man's composure cracked. "You think I wanted that for you? I think you never stopped long enough to notice what you wanted for yourself," Elliot replied. "And I won't hand that inheritance to Harper." Silence settled, thick and not entirely hostile. Harper, unaware of the tectonic conversation, was now showing Charles her drawing of the lemon tree. "That's home," she explained solemnly. "It grows because we talk to it." Charles stared at the paper, perhaps seeing for the first time that his granddaughter's world contained no skyscrapers, no ledgers, just roots. That night, after Charles left with a handshake that felt like a truce disguised as defeat, Elliot sat by the lemon tree and stared at the small fruit beginning to blush yellow. Alina joined him, barefoot, carrying 2 mugs. "How do you feel?" "Like I've just fired my boss and exorcised my father at the same time," he said. "That's progress," she said, handing him tea. "Do you think he'll forgive me?" "Probably not," Alina said, "but maybe he'll learn to respect you. Those things arrive in different packages." Harper appeared in the doorway, clutching her bunny. "Can we read the Fox book again?" Elliot nodded. "Of course." Alina smiled. It's her favorite because the fox always finds his way home. And because he never runs away twice, Harper added sleepily. Elliot lifted her into his lap, the book's pages soft from use. The three of them read together, the cadence smooth and practiced. Outside, the lemon tree shifted slightly in the wind, as if leaning closer to listen. Over the next few weeks, routine matured into something sturdier. Elliot still worked, but now he worked differently. Calls were shorter, walks longer. The company survived the novelty of a CEO who occasionally said, "That can wait." Harper thrived. She started calling her art projects. Alina started baking. Though her first loaf of bread resembled a small asteroid, they laughed until it hurt, yet even peace hums with old frequencies. One evening, Alina stood in the doorway of the guest room, suitcase open on the bed, not packed, not empty. Elliot froze at the sight. "Another flight?" he asked. She nodded. "Just one, a test run, 3 days." "Why?" His voice caught more emotion than he meant to reveal. "Because I need to make sure I can still leave and come back," she said softly. "That staying isn't a cage. I don't want Harper to learn fear disguised as love." He nodded, even though every instinct in him wanted to argue. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she echoed. Harper handled it better than he expected. "Angels have to fly," she said on the morning Alina left. "Otherwise, their wings get stiff." The house missed her immediately. It was in the echo of the kettle whistle, in the silence between bedtime pages. Elliot tried his best. Pancakes, songs, the same terrible bread recipe, but the rooms felt like they were holding their breath. On the second night, a delivery arrived, an envelope addressed in Alina's handwriting. Inside was a photo of Harper's drawing, the one with the triangles and halo. Beneath it, a note, proof we're real. "Keep the 622s alive." Harper taped it beside the fridge and added a crayon heart. "So she knows we listened," she said. On the third day, the alarm rang at 6:15. Elliot made pancakes, burned one intentionally, and placed it on the dad plate. When the door finally opened at 6:22, Harper didn't run. She just stood in the middle of the kitchen, serious, as if conducting a test. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Alina replied. Harper nodded, satisfied. "Then the house can breathe again." Elliot looked at the lemon tree outside, its leaves trembling under the evening breeze. "You see that?" he murmured. "She's got her mother's sense of drama." "No," Alina said, slipping her hand into his. "She's got ours." The house felt different that night, like it had passed some invisible inspection. Harper slept easily, the window open, the wind tracing soft patterns through her curtains. Later on the patio, Alina leaned her head on Elliot's shoulder. "He'll call again," she said, meaning Charles. "I'll answer," Elliot said, "but not at 6:22. "Good," she whispered. "That's sacred now." They sat together as the city's lights trembled against the bay, the lemon tree holding its small yellow promises. Inside, the clock ticked steady, faithful, right on time. They chose the date by feel, not calendar, the way you decide a batter is ready because it looks like readiness. Harper declared the lemon tree had 2 almost yellows, and that was good enough. A judge who owed Elliot a favor came at dusk with a tablet and a smile that understood quiet ceremonies. The backyard had been learning them for weeks. Tonight it felt fluent. There were no chairs set in rows, no aisle to dramatize the walk, just a throw blanket on the grass, the sapling steadying itself in a small breeze, and a string of borrowed lights that made the glass house look briefly like a diner in some kinder town. Alina wore a simple dress the color of fog just before it lifts. Elliot wore a shirt Harper approved because it looks like a sky that won't rain. Harper herself wore a white cotton dress and carried a lemon branch instead of flowers. She was solemn with purpose, which is to say, perfect. "Ready?" Elliot asked, not because the judge needed to hear it, but because his heart did. Alina looked at Harper and then at the kitchen, where a burnt pancake circle on the marble refused to be erased. "Yes," she said, the words sound and architecture. The judge stood under the lemon tree and didn't pretend this was a courtroom. "Short vows?" he asked. "Short," Alina said. "We have bedtime in 40 minutes. Elliot took her hands. "I thought love was a speech," he said. "Then you taught me it's a schedule I keep. I promise 6:22. I promise pancakes that aren't always good. I promise to water the lemon even when it looks like it doesn't need me. I promise to say Claire out loud and mean it as a door that stays open. He hesitated, smiling. And I promise to be boring in all the heroic ways. Alina's mouth trembled, then steadied. I thought staying was a cage, she said, but you and Harper turned it into a window. I promise to keep watch, to make soup that smells like Sundays, to leave the hall light on even at noon. I promise to fly without fleeing. And when I forget, I promise to come back and apologize without a speech. She exhaled, laughing at herself. Short enough? Harper stepped forward with two simple rings on a lemon leaf. Match, she announced, offering them like a verdict. Before the judge could proceed, she squinted at them both. Any objections? She paused, then narrowed her eyes playfully. Don't you dare! The judge made it legal with words that sounded, for once, like they possessed the right weight. You may kiss, he said, almost shy. They kissed without theatrics, like two people who had practiced affection in smaller rooms and now trusted it to survive the outdoors. Neighbors who happened to be on their decks pretended not to watch and then failed at pretending, cheering when Harper punched the air with her lemon branch. Charles did not appear that evening. He would come later, carrying weather in his coat and a tentative gift. For now the gift belonged to the light. They ate noodles at the kitchen window because no document can compete with the ritual that made it possible. Harper insisted on 3 fortune cookies, opening them until the message cooperated. You are exactly where you should be. She taped it next to her drawing on the fridge, as if adding a footnote to a constitution. The next morning, the house did what good homes do after a celebration. It put itself back together around them. Elliot swept confetti that wasn't confetti, just lemon pollen and crumbs, and found himself humming without noticing. Alina stood barefoot, rooted in a way that made the floor feel chosen. Harper asked if being married meant more pancakes. It means more mornings, Alina said. Pancakes are just one way to count. Routine did not puncture the magic, it proved it. Elliot met a board call at 7 years, canceled a dinner that used to prove he was important, and still made it home at 6:22 with a paper crown Harper had made at the community center. Alina burned her second loaf of bread into an asteroid so complete it felt intentional. They laughed, then ate it with enough butter to turn failure into folklore. Weeks arranged themselves with respect. There were flights again, chosen ones, plotted with the caution of people who understand how quickly distance can cosplay as freedom. Alina's first trip back in uniform lasted 2 days. Harper drew a chart with boxes labeled takeoff, cloud, snack, landing, and hug, and colored them in like diplomacy. Your wings won't get stiff, she told Alina at the door, looping Bunny's ear around Alina's wrist like a tether charm. But your hug better. I'll be back at 6:22 on Thursday, Alina said. It sounded less like a plan than a promise made of muscle. When she left, the house didn't hold its breath the way it used to. It inhaled, exhaled, and checked the clock. Elliot made pancakes and burned one edge on purpose. Harper placed it on the dad plate with a gravitas that would have delighted a bishop. At 6:22 on Thursday, the door opened, and Alina walked in without announcing herself like weather. Harper didn't run. She put a check mark in the landing box and held up her arms. On time, she said, and the clock agreed. Charles came on a Sunday with a bouquet of peonies. Claire liked loud flowers, he said, softer than his suits. He looked at Alina the way men like him look when they are learning to accept a rewrite they didn't authorize. You've made him late to some calls, he said, not unkindly. I've made him early to dinner, Alina answered. Charles glanced at the fridge and read, You are home, with a frown that wasn't disapproval so much as calculation giving up. He took Harper to the lemon tree and told her about Claire's first violin recital, how the A string snapped and she played anyway. She liked the way you draw, he said, and when he left, he did not try to renegotiate custody of anyone's time. Spring realized itself in yellow. The lemon tree offered its first full fruit, glossy and absurdly proud. Harper picked it with 2 hands and carried it like treasure. Proof, she said. Of what? Elliot asked, because fathers in good moods ask obvious questions, just to hear the answers. That the tree likes who we are. They cut the lemon into quarters and dropped slices into a pitcher of water, as if inventing a holiday. They clinked 3 glasses without toasting, because sometimes a clink is enough ceremony. On a Tuesday, the judge sent a digital photo of their backyard wedding he'd taken on his phone. The three of them stood under the string lights, a small constellation. Elliot's hand on Harper's shoulder, Alina's hand in Elliot's, the lemon tree doing its earnest best to look ceremonial. Harper printed it at the pharmacy with the seriousness of a curator and taped it next to the fortune. The corner curled, and she smoothed it like a collar before a picture day. Life continued to do its messy, astonishing thing. There were mornings when Elliot's resolve wore thin and the old gravity tugged. There were evenings when Alina had to remind herself that leaving now and then kept staying honest. There were tantrums about shoes and an inexplicable hatred of peas that no amount of negotiation could turn into peace. Nothing solved everything. Everything softened something. One late afternoon on the patio, Elliot taught Harper to squeeze a lemon half while keeping seeds from escaping. She grimaced at the strength required, then tried again, then succeeded with a squeal that startled the sapling into stillness. "It's sour," she announced, licking a finger with delight. "Some good things are," Alina said, smiling as she watched them. "You add water, you add time, you make it drinkable." They sat at the window that night with noodles and the Fox book. "Did he find his way?" Harper asked, pretending to have forgotten. "Always," Elliot said. When they finished, he set the book down, but not his voice. "Tell me about the day you were born," he said, because repetition is the scaffold of safety and because he had promised himself to become fluent in the past. He told it better this time. The scrambled drive, the overcooked coffee in the waiting room, the way Claire laughed at him for packing 2 toothbrushes. Harper asked the same questions she always asked. He answered them again, grateful for the practice. Later, when Harper slept with one hand open like an invitation, Elliot and Alina stood at the sink doing dishes the old-fashioned way because the dishwasher had decided to be dramatic. They bumped hips. They argued about nothing. They rinsed. "We're not glamorous," he said like a compliment. "Good," she answered. "Glamorous is lonely. This is loud and sticky and ours." They went out to the patio to check the lemon tree like parishioners checking a votive. It stood firm, leaves shining. Somewhere above them, a plane lowered itself toward the city, gear out, lights blinking in that patient rhythm people learn to love when they have gone away enough times to know the difference between leaving and returning. "We can still look up sometimes," Alina said, because she'd promised she would. "We will," Elliot said, looking up long enough to honor the sky, and then down again to count the reasons he didn't need to live there anymore. A breeze carried the faintest smell of citrus into the kitchen, past the island with the irremovable syrup circle, past the fridge with its manifesto and its fortune and its family photograph. It threaded through the hallway and lifted the edge of Harper's blanket, just enough to stir and settle. In the morning, alarms would chirp and the company would ask for slices of him, and the world would make the old case for speed. He would make pancakes badly and better. Alina would check a flight time and then turn the page of a calendar she no longer feared. Harper would draw 3 triangles touching, a halo behind them, and a lemon so large it could be a sun. They would read the fridge sentence at eye level because it was true and, like all true things, needed repeating. "You are home,"